You're asking me about soil solution and crop residue management, and this is a good example here of what I'm talking about. But what I was going to show you, if I can get down in this dirt, you see this ground?
Mm-hmm.
What happens is all this stuff is trying to rot, okay? And it's only been, well, there's some that's actually trying to rot a little bit, see there? But what's happening is this stuff is composting, just like if you put leaves in a bag to compost them for your yard and breaking down. When that happens, the first thing that it has to have is water. The second thing it has to have is nitrogen, because that nitrogen feeds the bacteria that breaks down the residue.
Yep.
All right, when you plant a seedling crop like this, okay, on top of this kind of residue that's just been turned under, the soil cycle takes care of itself first. So what's going to happen is the nitrogen that's in this soil is going to get depleted and used up in the composting process.
And your plant's not going to get the benefit.
And my plant is not going to get the benefit of it. And you say, well, what do we do? Well, one thing we can do is we can actually put out nitrogen. We can apply more nitrogen knowing that we've got this composting going on. The other thing is in 6 or 8 weeks, and it depends on it depends on rainfall and weather and everything else, but in 6 or 8 weeks after this stuff has gotten to a certain point in the breakdown process, it goes from using nitrogen to releasing nitrogen. So that's why a lot of times when you see something like this, it looks like it's suffering and suffering and suffering. It won't grow off, it won't do good. Next thing you know, it just takes off shooting like crazy. That's because it's made that conversion.
Okay.
You see? And what we do with soil solution is we try to help to speed that process up. This is a process that by most farmer standards, they'll tell you, well, how long does it take to break down crop residue? They'll say 6 months, because in reality, they harvest in September. Most of the residue is not as obvious come March or April when they break again, so in their minds it takes 6 months. Well, you know, you can see corn cobs in the field that was in corn 3 years ago. It takes a while for it to break down and compost. What we're doing is speeding it up. What I see with so many people are bush hogging, disking this in, fertilizing, seeding it, and going to the house.
Yep.
And then when they have trouble or they have a struggle or it doesn't come up good, you know, it's like, well, you know, what happened? What's wrong with the seed? Or what did I do wrong or whatever? This residue is causing more problems when it should actually be beneficial to them. So the thing that's the most beneficial becomes a detriment. That's the reason we created the soil solution formula, I think 1988 or something.
So technically, in a perfect world, if we all had ample time to do all this, you need to turn this under and wait at least a month before you come back in and put your seed in the ground, where that seed can take advantage of nutrients that's already in the soil. Whether you put any there or not, there's nutrients there, but until that 4 to 6 week period, it's not going to be able to utilize it.
That's right, and it starves the seedling crop for those nutrients and for moisture. Soil cycle, the soil is going to take care of itself before it feeds these seedling crops. It's just the way Mother Nature is. It's the way God created things, and you know, what we try to tell people is the most valuable thing you have is your soil. And I said, let's do what we can to take care of the soil. One simple way around it is, like this is sunflowers, and instead of putting out 60 or 70 units of nitrogen, with nitrogen cost like it is, we could step it up, add another 30 or 40 pounds. Most agronomists would tell you that to enhance the digestion of stubble, to put out 30 units of nitrogen per acre. That's what they'll tell you to do. We can use soil solution and do it for a whole lot less money and do it more effectively and more efficiently.
Okay.
That's what it's about.
And this is one of those things that it's hard for people to see this working.
Yeah.
They can see that seed coat works. They can see that plant power works. You can't see that soil solution's working.
No, out of sight's out of mind.
But you have to understand that there was a method behind the madness when you developed all this. There is a reason, and this is the building block for everything else. It's the most important part, even though you can't see that it's really happening.
Yeah. I think one thing that really made me recognize, I mean, I used a soil probe for years. We were doing hundreds of thousands of acres of soil testing for years, detailed soil tests and running the labs. And when somebody's crop comes up and it's not healthy, we get the call. and you go out there and you look at a corn crop or a cotton crop and you find weak areas in the field. And I found out the hard way, really, I can learn a whole lot more with a shovel than I can a soil probe, because what was happening is those weak areas, you dig those plants up to look at the root system, and what do you got? You've actually got crop residue up under that ground that's starving those seedlings. And where you had healthy plants, the residue was more completely composted. And that's when we said, we got to find a way to speed this baby up. And that's basically what we came up with. You know, there are people that have tried putting microbes in the soil and adding humic acid and all these different things. What we found is if you can take, there's plenty of microbes in the soil, plenty of bacteria and algae and mold and yeast. Instead of trying to put some out there that's been grown in a tub, so to speak, what we're doing is feeding the ones that are here.
Right.
Survival of the fittest, and trying to help them to flourish and repopulate and be more active. And it's really worked and worked well. And the reality is, if they do it the first year, they may say, well, man, why am I doing that? When they come back and break that ground the second time, they're gonna most of the time, that's when they'll realize and recognize the benefit, because the ground's breaking easier, the ground's mellower, they're not having to fight the residue like they have in the past. The ground just works a lot better because it's mellower. The reason it's mellower is more bacterial activity, is more oxygen, which is more water holding capacity.
Okay.
So it becomes more like a sponge, just like we were talking before. It becomes a healthy soil rather than just dirt.
And is this something that they need to do every year?
It would be a yearly thing. You know, I would do it one time a year, and if I had my preference, I would say the best time would be to do it, you know, in late summer or early fall, because what creates or enhances bacterial activity is when ground gets cold and then hot, dry and then wet, cold and then hot. All these changes is what pumps that cycle and pumps that bacterial activity and builds that level up. Whereas in the summer, it's not as active because it's hotter and dry. And you know, so you're taking advantage of the soil cycle itself by saying, okay, let's do it when it's wanting to refurbish itself.